And so let's talk about the pros and cons of purchasing your PPOR, your principal place of residence to start off with. I like to start with the pros. You know, and sharing a bit of my story when I purchased my PPOR, one of the things I wouldn't do, it was a unit. So it was a unit and I purchased it because I could afford it. I got the first home owners grant. So there are government schemes and government grants that do help you along with this. And you've got lower deposits or potentially no deposits if you can get a guarantee from family members or so on. So there are all these stamp duty savings and are lots of perks to buy your PPOR. And if you purchase in the right area, you do get it to be able to take advantage of any equity increase.
Definitely.
As well.
Definitely.
That's what I think is probably one of the best things there. Is like you take advantage of all the savings at the front end.
Yeah.
And if you buy well, say you buy well,
yeah,
that you can then be able to leverage any equity at the back end.
Yeah.
However, going back to the fact that don't overextend yourself as well, because if you've got a whole lot of equity and you have no serviceability, then you're sort of a bit stuck again.
Yes, definitely.
From that aspect.
And look, I think it becomes quite interesting for people who are making a lifestyle choice to, buy to live in. But the place where they are living is the place they cannot afford to buy. And so they overstretch themselves to basically go out there and buy in. And I think that's a typical problem that a lot of people face, that, if I give you an example for Melbourne, for example, of a particular client, they were pretty keen on living in McKinnon School Zone. And so, the average price point there is 1.4, 1.5. And so if you start there, your journey, you're starting it with a bang, you're locking in all your serviceability, you're putting in all your savings into that place. And that's it. You can't do anything else outside of that thing, So it's a pure lifestyle choice. And so if it's not going to be your forever home, don't start with a bang. That's what I always say. If it's not your forever home, you don't need to start with a bang. Aim to buy a forever home and then go for a bank. Yeah, 100%. There's no issues with that.
Yeah. And I think this is where the disadvantages of buying your PPOR to start off with. You're absolutely right. We get so drawn into this whole, it's my dream home and I love this and it's going to be where I'm going to grow my family and the bank's going to let me borrow 90% and then they're going to let me borrow $1 million and I'm going to go all in, and you're max to your eyebrows, right?
Yeah.
And any interest rate room. And this is where we get stuck in that rat race.
Yes.
In a sense, where exactly what you said, like, you might have some equity growth, but you're stretched to the point where you can't access any of that equity. And which means then you can't, it just takes a longer time for you to build that portfolio outside of your PPOR, which is what you want to do to be able to pay it down. So this is the irony, right? You want to have some leeway so that you can purchase more investment properties to help you pay down your PPOR, because the interest that you pay on your PPOR is not tax deductible. This is not tax advice, but generally is not tax deductible.
Yes.
Whereas if you're rent investing, or if you're investing in general, the interest on that generally is tax deductible.
Yes.
So Robert Kiyosaki, Rich Dad Poor Dad, talks about good debt and bad debt. So Mox was going to say Robert Kiyosaki. I was trying to, throw him off and say it's Kawasaki. It's not Robert Kawasaki. But he talks about good debt and bad debt. And I like to talk about it as more so lazy debt.
Yes.
Whereas lazy debt doesn't really do very much.
Yeah.
And then smart debt, which is you are making smarter choices with your debt, which is, tax deductible, and you can, do all sorts of things there.
Definitely.
So I think that's the cons there, when particularly it's more so when you're not clear with the strategy of how you can leverage your serviceability and your equity to build your portfolio and you're stuck. I think that's when it's frustrating for people.
Definitely. I think a lot of people don't realize a lot of people don't realize from a bank's perspective that, when the banks are assessing your borrowing capacity, they're looking at the cash flow. And so they're looking at how much money is walking out of the door from your, income perspective, right? And so when you're paying rent, it's a smaller amount. When you have borrowing, when you have your own house that you're paying debt on, that is still money walking out of the door, right? And that is significantly higher because you'd be paying principal and interest on that loan, which is and you might have overcapitalized it, which generally means that, you're blocking your serviceability off completely because there is no income coming out from any of these properties, right? It's just a roof over your head. And so to your point, that while you might, generate a lot of equity, if you don't do anything with the equity, it's just a roof over your head. It's still a liability, coming back to what, Mr. Was it Kawasaki? No.
Kawasaki.
No, Kawasaki.
Kiyosaki.
Mr. Robert was saying that the house is
This is going to be so fun.
So yeah, look, I mean, I'm a strong believer. I think it definitely makes sense that, the house that you live in is actually a liability, not an asset. And predominantly because, all it's doing is the intangible nature of it, putting a roof over your head and nothing else. And so there are ways you can convert this liability into an asset by using the refinance or the equity to your advantage and reinvesting it and buying more investment properties. Should you have the borrowing capacity, right? That's the most important point. If you overcapitalize and don't leave any borrowing capacity at all, that means that equity that sits there is not going to do any good to your, would not help you, build your portfolio or create generational wealth.
Yeah. And I guess there's a few things there to be able to allow you to do that. It's like you need to be able to be earning more. I mean, if you're in some sort of employment, get a pay rise. If you're in business, you've got a bit more scope because you can, earn more, make more in your business and be able to access the equity and also your serviceability.